Hello again. I'd just like to squeeze in one more video today. This one's going to continue along with the vector tabs in Grasshopper for Rhino. This is the 1, 2, 3 ABCs of Rhino. I guess the way I'm starting to see it as an artistic tool versus a kind of engineering tool is one would tend towards product making, whereas I think I'm in it for the producing. Just a sense of grab everything, a bricolage of opportunities, and continue to make. So there's something, I don't know, something kind of cool about the artist's mind, the seer's mind, the sage's mind, if I can relate them, with all this tool set down the side. And yeah, we've flown through and we've done the vector fields, the grid, the planes, and we're going to go into the points. I'm going to pull down all those nodes, and as I pull them down, I'm going to try and apply them. And they're over in this section on this side. So let's do it. Let's jump in here. Whatever we click will come to the foreground, and no reason to wait. So what we have here is, I use them all the time, probably as much as well, not as much as number sliders, but constructing a point. It's going to default to 0, 0, 0, but you could quickly go in with a number slider and have those points anywhere you want on the screen. I think it popped in here somewhere. There it is, not too far off. And then you can deconstruct that point. Not too hard to figure out. Use your panels to make sure your data is running through. Use your param viewers to see what's going on. See how many items you got, and start to think about how your data tree even looks by visualizing that data tree by right-clicking. All right, next thing is the series I drew in here, numbers to points, which is kind of cool. Basically come up with a series of numbers, 0 through 9. And those points are going to be drawn into those points, which is pretty cool. I think that's pretty awesome. I brought in this series, and this series, which are 3 different series that actually have the same things, and it puts those down into points, which I thought was pretty awesome. If you think about what that's actually doing in building a geometry from just a series of nodes, and the mask is set to an XYZ. I'm not sure if you could change that XYZ to YZ or XZ or other coordinate systems. I'm not sure. I haven't played too far with it, but it is a tool that I want to start doing, building points from number series and data. So, look into your finances and then build your geometries for the sculpture that needs to be up front of your house, telling of how your financial situation is going up and down. Just something a little creative that you might want to think about. All right, so let's just keep going. I popped in a cylinder. Let's zoom in on it. I took a populate geometry, which was the 3rd node in the last series that back here that I talked about. Populate 2D, populate 3D, and populate geometry. Go ahead and populate it. I've done the count down to 12. There it is, and I've got points to numbers, and I think that's pretty interesting. So I've got points, and now I have data. And it's all grafted onto each point, but you can flatten that and then end up with this really cool data that might inspire another piece of geometry. Keep in mind your param and your panel tool, and always take a look at that tree, which is kind of cool. What we've got here is 3. How many branches was that? That was 12 branches with 3 atoms each. So just a nice way of visualizing data. And start to think about what this actually means when you're simplifying grafting it. And actually, if we ever get down to the path mapper, let's see again what we could do with that data. All right, run it in again. I've got another cylinder that I popped in here a little bigger. It's not capped at the top of it. I populate the geometry down to 3 just on the sides. And I have a seed, so if I was populating that geometry, seed's just a nice way of being random, but going back to that. I grabbed a list item, which basically said, okay, out of those points, I'll just hold down Shift, which one am I actually going to select? The list item, the populate is coming out as one list, all flattened, so it's going to grab all of them because I actually zoomed in here and I put on the plus tool. So I have the I, 1, 2, 3, and then I started thinking, okay, what does barycentric mean? I can make a point anywhere on that cylinder, which is pretty darn cool. And then again, there's another tool, use the barycentric again to generate from another point, playing with different list items. And between those two, I can draw a line between them, which isn't very exciting. It's a very, very tiny line. But think about how that little tiny line dances as I change my seed. 1 second. Excuse me. And I do think I'm going to start getting into building geometry from points, even prior to any planes, and see what happens. And then I got a little distance feature here that tells me the exact distance, which is very small. There's another bit of information that I can remap, things that we did in the math file. You can think about that. Point cylindrical was kind of cool. I've used pi and radians kind of creeping around that. Now think about that as a series. As I start to loft that, as I start to make that move in and out, and move on an elevation up and down, what could I do with that point cylindrical? I can make some pretty awesome multiple double helixes and spirals, whatever I want to do with that. Point oriented, what was I doing there? I grabbed this point, let me just think, grabbed all three of those points on the UVW plane and orient them on this plane onto that point orientation. So I guess I was just showing that in use of orienting a point. Not that exciting. All right, here we've got 2 pi doing a full rotation. This is what I talked about, point polar. And here's what I was just talking about on the cylinder. It's got a pretty nice geometry here if you start playing in the pi. So you start playing with that range. Look at the control I start to get over some of that spiral and really playing with that as I follow in. Look at that twisting motion as well. So if you start to grab these two things as a domain, maybe pull this one into this one as well. Now you get 2 objects and you start to do some cool things with geometries and forms. And this is just like a lashing around. It leads you into the simulations and the kangaroo tools and what you might end up doing that other plugins do for you. But have a basic control. Take your mind back around what that is. Deal with points, the attributes of points, and what you can do. What did I do here? I think that's the offset. Let me jump back in there. What was my offset doing? Yeah, I was just changing the scale of that. And I interpolated it into a curve so I can actually look at those instead. And of course, you can pipe that and you can start to grab horizontal and vertical planes on there and then orient geometries to it. What do I have down here? I have construct point. Not so exciting, but I did 2 polar, which is kind of cool. What are we dancing around with here? To polar, just basically grabbing the phi, theta, and radius of these as data to a point, and then drawing lines between those ones, drawing lines between these ones, and there's a subtle difference as I go through here, and I think I have to grab my cylinder to do it. It's going to be hard to show you exactly what I'm doing. Let me grab it here to the top view. Maybe not top view. Let's go to right view. And there's my line. And just notice this little subtle difference that I can play with from this line, which links right to the top of that polar. This one's off a bit, and this one shows the distance in that line between the two. So I'm thinking of that geometrically. I don't know if I'm actually doing things that people normally do with it as scientists. I'm just trying to use it, try to figure out how every node works. So let's jump into here, grab a populate 2D, which is going to be hard to see if we're not in perspective. Let's zoom back in. We get a nice little cube, and we start to see the points of 41 points populated in there. And I can change the scale of that. And I'm populating those points, but they're coming up kind of hard to see right now. And then I've scaled those away. I made that box kind of jump. So that scale is on a 6 scale, 7 scale factor. And then I'm doing closest point. Where is the closest point from this point, which I've just generated, randomly going in the X, Y, Z as it slides up? Where's the closest point of that point to which point in here is closest to it? And there it is. That's the one that's closest to it. And then this is closest points. Which points? How many do I want in that point cloud? How many? Let's get 7 points. What are the closest 7 points from that point cloud to that point? And as I change that point, obviously those points have to dance and move. If that's not making sense, I could understand. Let me grab this one as the box. Where can I see the box? No, I guess I can't. That one and that one. As I change this number count, it's going to show me, well, I'm looking at too many right now. I'm looking at every point in the cloud. If I grab that point and I grab those closest points, obviously I start to play with that, and it's going to grab whatever points come close to that, which start thinking about how that affects animations and little kind of cool things that you're doing, and then we're just pulling the points out in the end to see what they are, the points closest point. And then you get the closest point index, and you get the distance between them you can have as data. All right, we got to look at this. 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, 9 minutes. We got 2 point clouds here and here. They're exactly the same. Now, what I'm showing here is I'm merging 2 pools of points, 12 points, let's say, these points and these points. And what I'll have to do is just grab the points to show you those. So those are the points of that set. Those are the points of that set. But they're exactly the same because I haven't changed anything to the list. I merged them together. The data coming out of there is basically double. So these points are repeating themselves. And all the call duplicates is doing is it's taking everything that's within range of one another and getting rid of it. So you're back down to the 12 points again. So if you're playing with 2 different sets and they actually overlap, it'll clean it up a little bit for you. And you can think of that as point cleanup. Populate 2D. There it is again. I've got 100 points in there. Point groups is kind of cool because how can I affect the amount of point groups in there? And right now, this is a cool param viewer. Let me go in here because it's showing a picture, but let's also show the data. I got 22 branches. I have one branch item that has 42 of the items on it. One has 28, one has 9, and one has 1. And that's all changing because of this data in here. And it changes pretty drastically. It goes all into the 100 because I'm playing with a very small distance and they're very tight together. But you start to control geometries by using this point groups out of populating 3D. So I thought that would be kind of cool to do that. I'm not sure why I just grabbed a geometry instead of a point to see those. Yeah, and you can see them in list items. Like if you had a list item here, you'd have 22 branch list items, and they'd all have different numbers. Most of them are bouncing around 1. There's a 2 there. I think it continues down, and it's all 1s. Anyway, like I said, you're starting to think about things in panels and param viewers of what your nodes are doing to control that. And that's where my mind's going. That's why I'm finding Grasshopper very interesting. Here's a sphere. It's got a radius. I've reparameterized the surface. So as I go around on a UV count, I can make more, I can make less in the UV points. And if you don't see what I'm doing, if you can't visualize what I'm doing, I'm just going to grab a quick interpolation there. And those points, you can start to see those interpolated right there. So I've got a 4 count, I've got a 6 count, and you see what's happening. And then I put one in a negative direction of the geometry. And this sphere, why did I do that? Why I wanted to see a point project. Yeah, basically I have a sphere, a small sphere inside of a big sphere, and I want to project these points onto this sphere. That's exactly what I did, but I had to do it in a negative direction. And that's the geometry I want that geometry to go to. Pretty cool tool. I think I'll be using that for sure. And then here's a little point. Just grab a geometry and do the points that you want to pull towards that. So it kind of does that in one step. So a little more control on this one, a little less control on this one. Look in your panels and find out what's going on. Okay, we got to keep moving. Oh my gosh, 12 minutes. Populate account set at 100 with a different seed. Sort points. That's exactly what it's going to do. You're going to have all these points out of order saying they're lists like this every which way they want, and it's going to treat it as an XYZ and put it in order. So that's really about data management, and that might come in handy for lofting, doing levels of a building, coming up in an interpolated step curve or pipe, trying to go vertical with something. You've got to think how the numbers affect the geometry, and that's really what it is. Put the math and the logic into your modeling skills. And yes, 21st century this is where I'm going. I'm going in 21st century digital sculptor or digital modeler, what's needed. So what I also did was I took that list count, which I think is set 100, and I minused a certain amount from it to do a random reduce and bring that down to less points because I don't want to see all these points. I want to see less of them. And then with those points, I've just pulled them into a little point node. I want to interpolate them, and there's my curve that I can start to sort along curve, which I haven't really figured out why to do that because it's already sorted anyhow. So my data isn't really changing, but it does give me access to those list items along the curve, and they've been sorted. I understand it a little more in taking those points and building cylinders around that point, and then taking very specific to the vectors tab in this section, which I should go back to, which is actually the point section. It ends with a really nice sort along curve. So you can take that geometry and literally take that geometry and put it along that curve. Of course, you have to look back at the cylinder to see it. And I've just changed the radius and length of that so I can see what's going on. And that's in a very structured, ordered way. Actually, it's before I did sort along curve, but it's already sorted enough. Anyway, I think that's it. Well, what else did I leave? Nope, just list item. That's enough to play with. That's a lot of time. I'm going to grab all this like I usually do. I'm going to hit group. I'm going to treat it nice, calm blue because I feel like I've done it in my own mind. I can start playing with these randomly. And we're going to go into the vector tab and pull down the deconstruct vector all the way through to the vector length. We're at 13, almost 14 minutes. And once again, not too exciting to look at, but there it is. There was a cool curve that was coming in there and being manipulated. Yeah, you're building things like this in modeling, but you've got to have the foundations before you can do anything creative with this, in my opinion. And it's nice to go back to the points prior to thinking vectors, thinking planes, then thinking surfaces, lines, surfaces, and then solids, which is where most people come from as sculptors. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Michael Wickerson on YouTube. Subscribe.